Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. Fourth-ranking GOP Senator John Thune is running unopposed for re-election in South Dakota. So the chairman of the Senate Republican Policy Committee is traveling the country to campaign for other Republican candidates. In 1996, he won his first term as a U.S. congressman from South Dakota and served only 2 more terms as promised. And then, after a narrow loss in a Senate race in 2002, he defeated Tom Daschle in 2004. It was the first time in 52 years that a Senate party leader lost. And now he's on the short list of Republicans thinking about running for president in 2012. Senator John Thune, welcome to Newsmax TV.
It's great to be with you on Newsmax. Thanks, Kathleen.
Ohio, California, Texas, and now Florida are just some of the states in which you've campaigned on behalf of candidates. How big of a win can we expect in the House, and what are the chances Republicans will capture the Senate?
I think the House looks very good. My guess is, and of course there are different estimates about where this, I'm Scandinavian, so I tend to kind of, the glass is always half empty. But, so you don't want to get your expectations that are unrealistic, but I think there are very good odds that we can retake the House. By how much, I don't know. You listen to different experts who are doing all the modeling, and it looks like, somewhere in that 50 to perhaps 60 seat range, which would be great. The Senate, I think, is a little more difficult. There are some races that are very close. I think that we can win a lot of those races if people come out. It's all going to come down to turnout, but we have a number of races, particularly kind of in the middle of the country, that are just very, right now in terms of polling, inside the margin of error. But it would be great. It takes 10 to get the Senate back. I think that's possible. Probably more likely, I think, that we win 7 or 8.
Let's talk about some of those close races in the Senate. Colorado, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Washington State, West Virginia, and Nevada, where Sharon Angle is locked in a close battle with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. How do you see Nevada and some of these other races turning out?
I think Nevada looks very good for us right now. Sharon Angle is leading in most polls by 3 or 4 points. Plus, I believe that if a Democrat in a state isn't at least even, or I should say, several points ahead going into Election Day, that the turnout's just going to swamp a lot of these Democrat candidates. We saw that happen to Republican candidates in 2006 and 2008. And my guess is that a lot of these states that are sort of on the bubble today where the Republican is ahead or even a little bit behind, we could end up winning most of those races. So it looks good in all the states that you mentioned right now. We're keeping our fingers crossed.
Now, you endorsed California Republican Carly Fiorina, and she's back on the campaign trail after just getting out of the hospital. Have you spoken to her, and do you expect her to win?
I think she's got a really good shot. We're very bullish on California. She's run a great campaign. She's in a position, I think, to win that race. Again, it's all going to come down to turnout out there in California, but she's an extraordinary candidate. She's terrific on the campaign trail. I've campaigned with her. Very smart, of course, very charismatic, and would be a terrific senator. And she's in this race for all the right reasons. And that would be a tremendous win, not only for the state of California, but for the country, because she is a quality person who would come to Washington, I think, with a great deal of both life experience and business experience that could be very, very helpful to us as we try and fight against this sort of big government agenda that we're seeing led by the Democrats right now in Washington.
Let's talk about Obamacare, because there's major grassroots opposition against it, and most major polls show that Americans are overwhelmingly against it. If Republicans capture the House and perhaps maybe the Senate, what are the chances that it will be repealed?
I think we have to try. Whether we'll be successful or not remains to be seen, and I think that will be determined largely by the elections, how big the gains are in the House. Will we have a majority that will enable us to repeal it? I think that they will get a vote in the House on that. Whether or not we can get 60 votes in the Senate for that remains to be seen, but it's a fight we need to have. And I think we need to do everything we can to put a bill on the President's desk that repeals Obamacare and replaces it with something that makes a lot more sense, that actually is focused on reducing costs for people in this country, which I think most Americans are finding now that as a result of the passage of Obamacare, their insurance rates are going up, not down. And that's what we predicted all along would happen. And many of the aspects of this bill, people are just now coming to grips with, and I think there's going to be a lot more unhappiness among the American people when this thing becomes fully implemented, and that's why we have to do everything we can to try and repeal it.
Now, going back on promises, the Democrat-controlled Congress failed to address the year-end expiration of the Bush tax cuts before the elections. Will the cuts be extended?
I believe they will. The question is that happen in the lame duck session after the elections? And I think, again, that will be determined largely by what happens in the elections. Should Senator Reid, for example, lose in Nevada, does he come back then in the Senate and want to get some of these things done before the end of the year, or does he want to just punt them down the road and let Republicans deal with them in January? So I think much of that will be shaped by what happens next Tuesday, but my hope is that there will be enough Democrats in both the House and the Senate who conclude that it would be a huge mistake to raise taxes on small businesses in the middle of an economic downturn, and that's essentially what we would be doing if we were to adopt the President's proposal, which just limits stops the tax increases at a certain income threshold, and or if we go ahead and do this whole thing for everyone, which is the right, correct policy as far as I'm concerned, and there are some Democrats, I think, who are coming to that same conclusion.
Senator, you delivered the most recent weekly GOP address, and in it you said that President Obama should be more focused on job creation than he is on campaigning. Can you tell us how Republicans plan to bring down that stubbornly high unemployment rate and spur economic growth here in the U.S.?
I think it starts with providing economic certainty, and what we have right now coming out of the President and his leadership in the Congress is tremendous uncertainty in the economy. People don't know what tax rates, for example, are going to be come January 1 on income, on capital gains, on dividends, on estates. They don't know what's going to happen with regard to energy policy, which is a big cost of doing businesses for most businesses in this country. They have a whole new health care mandate and lots of taxes that are going to be imposed on them. They're still trying to sort through that. I think the best thing Republicans can do is make sure that the tax relief is extended, that tax rates stay low, that we deal with this, a lot of these new regulations that are being put in place that impose these new mandates and requirements on businesses, and of course many of those are associated with the massive health care expansion and the financial services reform bill. And then I think we've got to get spending under control and start dealing with this out of control Washington agenda right now and the run-up in spending that we've seen in the last couple of years, and start dealing with what is a serious problem in my view for the future of our country, and more particularly the future of our economy, and that is a runaway debt, because we've got a massive amount of debt that we're dealing with, and it grows by every day, and it's growing at about 1.3 or 4 trillion dollars every year.
Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich said recently that if President Obama wants to avoid being a one-term president, that he's going to have to move toward the center. We saw Bill Clinton, former President Clinton, doing that after losing Congress to Republicans in 1994. Do you think that President Obama is capable of a Clinton-esque triangulation to the center?
The big question, I think, for President Obama is, does he have the capacity to come to the middle and to try and work in a constructive way with Republicans and actually do some things, get some results for the American people? My impression is that he's very ideological. I think we've seen that in these last 2 years. And I also think that his political base is very much to the left of his party. And they seem to pull him hard in that direction on almost every issue that we've dealt with so far. I would hope that he will be willing, when this is all over after Tuesday's elections, to say, I do want to reach out to Republicans. It's certainly something that hasn't happened so far, but it would be in his best interest, frankly, and the country's best interest if he were to do that. And the question about whether that will happen, I think, at this point remains open.
Let's talk about 2012. I know that you have mentioned that you've talked about running for president in 2012, but have said that you haven't made any decisions just yet. Where are you in the thought process right now?
I think I'm where anybody else who might be contemplating that might be. I mean, there are some candidates on our side who are a lot farther down the road than others, but my focus right now has been Tuesday's elections and doing everything I can to help elect more Republicans to the House and Senate. I've been traveling the country on behalf of candidates. Many of the states that you mentioned earlier, where we've got competitive Senate races, are states that I visited on behalf of our candidates. And I think right now that's what we all should be focused on, because the best thing that we can do right now to change the direction of this country is to elect more Republicans to the House and the Senate this year. And then the debate about 2012 will get underway. But I obviously want to make the most of my work and my service to the public, and anybody I think who does that, gets into public life for those reasons, wants to maximize the impact that they can have. And so obviously we'll look at opportunities to do that.
Now, former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin recently visited us here at Newsmax, and you have said that Sarah Palin's decision on whether to run would, quote, change the equation for you and all other potential Republican contenders. What kind of presidential candidate do you think that she would make?
Well, I think if she decides to do it, she obviously would have a big following out there. She's a very inspirational, charismatic figure and very influential in Republican Party politics. I'm not sure that when I said that she would change the equation, I think that her presence in the race obviously would impact the race. I don't think that it necessarily impacts other candidates. I think other candidates are going to have to make their decisions predicated upon what they think they can contribute and the difference that they can make for the future of this country, and trying to get into a race where we might be able to replace President Obama, which I think is the right thing to do for the country. And we'll have a lot of people who are going to be looking at that decision, and I think they're going to be making that decision really probably independent of what any other candidate does. But if Governor Palin were to get into the race, she obviously would have, I think, a terrific following out there and be someone that everybody else would have to contend with.
Let's turn to national security. You're a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Do you think that we're safer under President Obama?
Well, I think that the President has, in some areas of his foreign policy, done some things that many of us have supported. I think with respect to Afghanistan, we have stood behind him and his decision to get more troops on the ground over there, to get General Petraeus in charge of that situation. I think he's got we now have the right leadership there and the right strategy. But in other areas, I think he's demonstrated weakness. And I think there's a perception around the world and among many of our potential adversaries, and for that matter, among our allies, that this is not a president who necessarily means what he says and says what he means. And I think with regard to how he's dealt with Iran, that would be one particular example. But I think that what you need when you live in a dangerous world, and we do, is you need an American president who projects strength, who projects leadership, and doesn't project what I think is the sort of ambiguity that comes out of the White House a lot of times with regard to some of these big foreign policy issues.
You touched on Iran. Would you support a U.S. strike or an Israeli strike against Iran to address the nuclear threat? I
think you have to be prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. That is a destabilizing, that is a game changer, let's put it that way, in the Middle East. It's an existential threat to Israel, for example, and obviously would have tremendous implications for America's national security interests as well. So, I think obviously you want to do everything you can short of that, but I think you have to have every option on the table to prevent them from getting that capability. And right now they seem very intent on pursuing that and are taking all the necessary steps to become a nuclear power.
Senator John Thune, thanks so much. We appreciate your coming by.
Thanks, Kathleen. It's great to be with you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.